Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. My name's Devin. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you're ready for another great episode of taking old, classic, great ideas and giving them some practical application. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about whether or not the pen is truly greater than the sword. So remember, if you like this episode, make sure you share it with your friends, your neighbor's dog, your schoolmates, wherever you think that somebody might benefit. Make sure you just share this podcast with them and get the word out there. All right. So before we get started, I want to address the comment of the week. The comment of last week, actually, technically it's a bye-week since I'm releasing on a bi-weekly schedule. But last episode's comment, there we go, came from Griffin. Griffin asked, "What do you think about the Fair Tax Act?" And I think that is a loaded question. It's a great question. It's a loaded question. But first and foremost, hi, Griff. I hope you're doing well. Been a while since I've seen you. But with the Fair Tax Act, for those of you who don't know, the Fair Tax Act is basically a complete revamping of America's current tax system, a system that, in my opinion, has been really outdated, far too old, and is really in disrepair and allows for a lot of corruption, a lot of double tax, so to speak. And so you're getting taxed on multiple fronts. And I think that with the Fair Tax Act, I have a bit written out here just because I had to really do some digging. I read probably half of the Fair Tax Act. It's only 123 pages. And so I actually encourage all of you to go give it a read and see exactly what it does. And a lot of the justifications for it, I think, are spot on. We'll see how application works. If it were to get passed, I don't think it'll get passed, but we will see. So with the Fair Tax Act, it basically gets rid of the IRS and really dumb taxes like the estate tax, or otherwise known as the death tax. And it really just simplifies everything into a 23% sales tax. And so, which I think is great because it puts the power of taxation into the hands of people. And because, you're not getting taxed unless you buy something, and so you can save money when you don't spend it, and it really gives this incentive for wealth building, which I like. And so I know the 23% tax is kind of a debate. Some experts say that with the back taxes that occur and things like that, it'll be around 30% sales tax, but the text says 23%, so that's what I'll go with for now until I really, really learn more about it. It seems like a lot, but 30% seems like a lot. However, I did some simple math with my monthly expenditures and versus the actual federal income tax rate, and we actually saved $6,000 or something like that, which is a lot of money. And so I think, to figure out whether something is viable, whether it's practical, I really love to use Occam's razor, and that's exactly how I went through this process. And I think how we should go through a lot of our processes is to make sure that we're using, for those of you who don't know Occam's razor, check out this great episode on how to philosophize, and it'll give you a bit more in depth. But Occam's razor is essentially a philosophical concept that basically states that the most viable and likely option to be most effective is going to be the simplest one with the least amount of steps that still works well. And so I kind of just try to shave things down with Occam's razor, so to speak. And I think that having a 23% sales tax is a pretty good idea. And simplicity is surely better than a lot of tax doors, a lot of tax backdoors. And, you don't really need a good lawyer to understand a sales tax. If you buy it, you're taxed. If not, you don't. And so I think for the most part, I'm a fan so far. We'll see what later commentary, later understandings bring us to, but for the most part, right now, I'm a pretty big fan of the Fair Tax Act. Now, nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. However, I think that it's a good start to simplifying taxes, and a really needed simplification because, taxes are really complicated. We just filed ours, and it's complicated. So I hope that was a brief enough answer to a very complex question like that, a very hotly contested question like that. And so remember to leave a comment, question, review, even, I don't know, a story or something down below, and you'll have a pretty good chance at getting shouted out on the next episode. So with that, let's return to the regularly scheduled program. And so now I'm certain that many of you are kind of wondering about the pen versus the sword. It's a really old phrase. The actual phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, comes from a play by Edward Bulwer Lytton, and he was a British playwright. He wrote the play Richelieu, which I think is how you pronounce it. My French is not great, but it's Richelieu, and Richelieu is a cardinal in France, and he discovers, okay, spoiler alert, play from 1839, spoiler alert. All right. He discovers a plot to assassinate his king, who he is, I believe, the chief advisor to. And so he discovers this plot, and he, in the course of figuring out what to do, because he's a priest, he's not going to use violence, he utters the words, "The pen is mightier than the sword." And he was really sorting through his options with everything. And so that's where 1839 is when that actual phrase comes out, but it's much, much older. We have examples from writings 500 BC talking about the utility of the pen being of writing things down being much more useful than just the sword, than just brute strength. And so, and that carries through. I mean, in scripture, we have the saying that the living word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword. And so, again, reiteration of that idea. And so, old idea, I'm thinking now that maybe, I don't know, Friedrich Nietzsche might have something to say about, I don't know, the the sword is always mightier or something like that. I don't know. But that's neither here nor there. I haven't seen anything from him. But if you have any Nietzsche quotes about swords being greater, which sounds like something he'd do, leave them down below. So with the pen being mightier than the sword, I think a great, and I think some of you will probably understand that, especially during peacetime, right? That of course the pen is much greater. You don't always need to use a sword. Strength is not always needed, but what happens when the chips are down, right? When we are in a real pickle and we need to get out of something. We're in a tough spot, like, I don't know, poverty, extreme poverty, war, especially war, I suppose, is a good time for a sword. But what about like when something, I don't know, traumatic happens to us and we're just in that post-traumatic phase and we are not sure where to go and we feel weak, we feel run down. How will a pen benefit us? How will reading benefit us? And I think to know whether we will benefit from the sword or from the pen, we should really understand a little bit more about each. And so the sword represents strength, justice, immediacy. That's really what I believe that the sword, throughout most of literature, when you talk about a sword symbolically, it represents strength, justice, immediacy. And so it represents strength through, well, obviously, the strongest wins when it's a battle of the swords, right? In a sword fight, it's very simple. The strongest, the fastest wins. So the best with the sword wins. And with justice, We have Lady Justice, right? For those of you who are, maybe listening to this, the statue of, blind justice, it's also known as, and she has the scales, a blindfold, and she also has a sword. And why would she have a sword? Well, a sword enforces justice. You have to have some teeth behind your punishment, your sentence, right? You have to have something behind it. And justice is this way that we, and a good reason that really we fight, right? We all want to feel that we are, if we have an instance of injustice, that we are getting justice, that we are avenging whatever it is that was wronged. And so we need a sword for that. And so swords also represent immediacy. With that, and why it represents immediacy, that one might not be as apparent to everybody, but with the sword, when we're speaking about it symbolically, what is a sword? You act with a sword right now. You might need it to defend yourself very quickly, or you might need it to attack someone unsuspecting, or you might just be entering into a fight. But whatever you're doing with a sword, it's immediate. It's right now. Nothing else really matters. And so we could think of immediacy as something like instant gratification, and which is kind of the opposite of the pen in some ways. Not everything is opposite of one another in this statement while we're breaking it down, but that one is kind of opposite. And so with the pen, I believe the pen represents wisdom, it represents clarity, it represents also concreteness, because when you write something down, you're putting it in the world. It's no longer an idea in your head. It's not just sitting up here in your frontal lobe. It's now in the world. And so there's something concrete. It's, so to speak, set in stone. And so when we're writing things down, we bring it into the world, and now it exists, not just as a thought. You don't really get damned for thoughts. You get damned for the things you write and the things you say. And so the pen represents concreteness, and it concretizes a lot of the things that you're saying. It also represents clarity, because when you write something, it brings your thoughts, like we were just talking about, it brings your thoughts out of your frontal lobe, and you're able to see them. When you write them down, you see them. They're on paper, and you can evaluate whether or not that's the right idea, whether that's what you meant, whether that's even something that makes sense at all, right? It brings clarity and understanding to our thoughts, our and then subsequently our actions, right? Because we act on our thoughts alone. And so, and then it represents wisdom, which I think is pretty apparent when you're reading, when you're writing, when you're really trying to explore ideas, when you're really trying to explore yourself. It's not just ideas. Well, yourself is an idea to an extent, but you're trying to explore knowledge, right? And in that is wisdom. So pen, very big symbolic representation of wisdom. And so you might be wondering, how does reading and writing benefit us? How, especially when we're in a really bad situation. Now that we kind of understand what these things, represent, we can take and kind of understand how we are impacted by reading and writing when we're in a sticky spot. And so first off, I want to say that, if you're in real threat of danger, use a sword. If you have to use a sword, use your strength, flee, get out of that situation. You're not going to get anywhere if you're dead, so to speak. If it's that drastic of a situation, get out of there. Because anywhere is a better place than, being where you're likely to get hurt or maybe even killed. So get out of there. That's first and foremost. But if there's no immediate threat and you're in one of those instances where maybe you're in a post-traumatic situation, or maybe you're currently encountering, some trauma, some maybe not physical trauma, real sexual trauma, but maybe it's, I don't know, verbal, emotional trauma. And you're just getting battered by that continually. Or maybe you're in poverty right now. You don't have a couple pennies to rub together and you're just watching this video, hanging out. First off, hi, I hope you're doing well. And second of all, try to write down what it is you need, because if we don't know what we need, if it's not, again, concrete in the world, we don't actually know that we need it, right? Because a lot of us talk about whether or not we should have a guide, a roadmap for life. And the roadmap for our life is in our hands. It's in each and every one of our hands, as long as we can write it down, because it's particular to every one of us. And there's only one way to discover that roadmap, and that's through writing and reading and coming to a great understanding. And that's really where I believe the pen gains a lot of strength, right? In this ability to guide the actions of ourselves and other people in the world through understanding, through guiding our thoughts and orientating us to hopefully a better future. So if you're in those really crappy situations, that's where writing can help us figure things out. Reading can do the same too. You might say, well, I need to work 60 hours and, I need to figure out, all this stuff, and I don't even have 10 minutes to yourself. Well, I bet you do. Are you sitting in the bathroom? Yeah, pull out a book. Read something. Try to get somewhere better through understanding, because reading gives us examples of people carrying out their lives, doing their own thing. Reading gives us examples of that. And so we don't actually have to go through, that's the beautiful thing about reading, we don't actually have to go through every one of those situations and learn the hard way about, maybe learn through the sword of how this situation plays out. We can say, oh man, if I actually gamble all my money away, that's not good. I might end up in a not so great place. I might get divorced. My wife might leave me. I might, get arrested because I don't have enough money to pay the casino. And so we can read a story about a guy with a gambling addiction and say that I don't want that to be me. Great. Of course, we don't want that to be you. And the only way you're going to get out of that is if you're able to reconceptualize where you're at. And the only way you can reconceptualize where you're at is through education, right? You can only gain that through learning, through greater, deeper understanding. And to bring in kind of what these concepts look like today, I believe that the pen really looks like, to give some practical application here, the pen really looks like journaling, but it also looks like going to therapy, right? Because the pen represents wisdom. And that's how we're going to gain understanding, right? Is through wisdom, and part of gaining perspective and understanding and working through maybe some of those ideas that we just can't get rid of, because that certainly happens. We have these core beliefs, which I covered somewhat in the last episode. The core beliefs that we hold on take some time to work through. And one of the best ways to work through ideas that we are really sure of is to enter into a dialogue. And that's exactly what therapy is, what most therapy is. Now you have some where they're, set schedules and whatnot, but really what you want to do is enter into a dialogue to figure that out, to pull apart these ideas that are stuck in your head, these points of reference that your brain uses when it's sorting through things in the world. It's kind of pulling this and that. It's saying, I'm worthless. It's saying that I'll never be good enough, all those things. And it's finding all those instances, and we need to work through that. And so going to therapy is one of those ways that we gain wisdom. And there's so many options for us to enter into, a therapeutic relationship, right? And so go out there, get some therapy. That's one of the ways that we can make sure that we're utilizing the pen. Another way is reading great literature. if you want to understand a key component of many representations of the human condition, you're going to want to read great literature. Great books are the doorway to understanding the human condition. And if we don't understand the human condition, we will never be able to accurately write out our roadmap. If we don't understand what we are, who we are, what our presuppositions are, we are never going to go out in the world and act effectively. And so we're going to want to make sure we're reading some great literature. Now, you don't have to constantly read great literature. You can read your rom-coms, you can read your small adventure novels. That's great. But reading some great literature, and in the future, I'm going to make a reading list, and so it can act as a bit of a roadmap for some of you who maybe don't know where to start, right? Because that was certainly me not long ago. I didn't know where to start, what to do, and I decided to go get a college education and try to figure that out. That's another way, right, of utilizing the pen, is getting educated. Really, that's all what all of these components are. They all kind of ascend into education. They all pay homage to education, because that's what you're doing. You're educating yourself. And there's almost nothing greater than reaching a deeper understanding of who you are, of where you've been, of where you might go in your life. Because as much as we don't like to believe it, in this era of seeing people on the videos and seeing people on photos, and it's all colorful and we can see that they're real human beings, there was a lot more real human beings prior to us, and they've written a lot of great books. They've also gone through a lot of awful situations. They've done a lot of awful things. And so unless we understand history deeply, we are very much doomed to repeat it. And so I think that with the pen, we're really trying to educate ourselves. And part of that too is not only journaling our thoughts, because that's understanding yourself. Going to therapy is also understanding yourself. Reading great literature is understanding others and how we might interact and deal with situations similarly or differently. But it's also writing about great ideas, because if you are just reading these great ideas, you might kind of have a head knowledge, but you never bring that clarity to them, right? To your own representation and understanding, because you might actually have something to offer. You might read these great writers and say, oh, actually, because of this prior experience and this point of education that I have, I actually understand this concept a little differently. And other people might benefit from knowing that as well, because I know there's a lot of people that have gone through my situation. And so maybe they might benefit. And then you write a book. How great would that be? Just from reading some great ideas to becoming an author. How great would that be? And because when we're writing about great ideas, we're figuring out what we actually believe. And it's also great to just figure out what you actually believe, right? That's part of using the pen, to educating yourself about yourself, because we take all these presuppositions, all these past experiences, and it's like, what the heck do these, what do these mean? What does this mean? What are taxes? What is government? What do I think? And so writing these out, you're going to place yourself in a much more organized, stable place, and you're really less likely to fall into the political pitfalls that many other people fall into. And so try to educate yourself by understanding what you believe, because yeah, we really don't know. I'm writing out a document right now where I'm working on it slowly. I don't want to sound like I'm writing on it constantly. I'm working on it slowly, of what I think about things like taxes, because then it comes into what I believe about the Fair Tax Act, and when I address that in a comment. And I'm thinking about government, and I'm thinking about the relation of church and state. And so figuring out all these things is really important, even if it's a short few paragraphs. You don't have to write a whole political manifesto, but just figuring out what you think, and being curious about better ways to operate in the world is really what the pen looks like today, right? How we can bring that in. And so now, what does the sword look like? Well, I think today we're seeing what the sword looks like very clearly on things like Instagram, where it's strength and fitness training, right? That's the sword. This relationship with the body, this might, this strength, this willpower to overcome great immediate adversity by training the body. And I think that's great. I think that's such a good step that a lot of the culture's heading towards, is bettering themselves, of spending time working on the body. And I mean, you can find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of quotes talking about the importance of training the body. And I believe it's all of them are absolutely true. It's so important. We're also seeing an uptick in things like combat training, jujitsu, martial arts training, even actual sword fighting. I guess you have guys that actually dress up and not dress up, they armor themselves. I'll give that some dignity and respect. They armor themselves and they actually go out and fight with real blunted weapons, and which looks really fun. Honestly, it looks really cool. And so they kind of reenact and all these battles and stuff, and it's cool. But the sword also looks like arguments on social media, right? We bring in this need for immediacy and strength and justice, and we find ourselves arguing on Twitter. And I'm not going to say that I'm not a part of that group either, because that certainly happens, right? You have this immediate reaction, and you want to bonk them with the sword of justice, right? And so that's also what we can see the sword looking like today. And I know I'm not giving as much time to it, but it's really, I believe the sword is very simple, right? It's very simple. We could also say that the sword looks like activism in its very toxic form that it can look like. And so when we look at activists, they are going to be using the sword because of justice, right? That's the sword that they're carrying when they say that we want justice. They're carrying a sword, every one of them. They might not be, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're carrying a sword and saying, we want to make this change now. And they might not be using the pen, right? They might just be wanting to overturn the current system in order to feel a sense of justice. And so with that, you might be wondering, which is better? Is the pen really mightier than the sword? Well, I want to use an example. And I want to use this example because I think that it's easy to take some great ideas and talk about them, but I want to give them a kind of an analogy. And so I'm going to use Game of Thrones. And so an example of the sword, I believe, especially the sword ignoring the pen, is Daenerys Targaryen, right? Daenerys is someone who is strong, who is mighty, who is a very strong purpose, right? She's got this purpose. She wants to reclaim the Iron Throne. And for those of you who don't watch Game of Thrones, just bear with me. And so Daenerys wants to regain the Iron Throne, and that's her goal. She can see nothing really beyond that. And that gets her, in the end, into a lot of trouble, and eventually kills her because she becomes like the Mad King, her father, and then she dies. An example of the pen would be, I believe, Samuel Tully, right? He is a guy who's very studied, he reads, but he's not a good fighter, right? He's kind of the opposite of Daenerys, where he's not very strong, he's not very quick or agile, he's not the conventional powerhouse that we all think of when we think of something like the Game of Thrones, where there's a lot of sword fighting, and especially in this, where this is set, right, in this time period and in this fantasy world. Samwell is not very strong at all, but he's smart, he's wise, he's really the one that discovered a lot of things on how to defeat the White Walkers and to come up with effective strategies and all that. So he's really like this mastermind, this really great thinker, but he's not very good at all with fighting and strength. And I think if we want to understand an integration of both, we'd want to look at Jon Snow, right? The kind of the trifecta of Game of Thrones right there in this good understanding of is the pen mightier than the sword? Who triumphs in the end? the one who's integrated. He's integrated wisdom into strength, right? He's taken the advice of others. He's taken his understandings of all of the encounters and the encounters of others as well, and he's really integrated those. And it takes time. We see John's character as someone who wants to use the sword, right? He wants to use the sword. He does. He's one of the most skilled swordsmen in the whole Seven Kingdoms, right? And he wants to use the sword, but he finds that the sword lacks something, and it's wisdom, it's purpose, it's justification, it's education, right? It lacks wisdom. And so the sword lacks wisdom, and John understands that. And so he works to integrate his ability for strength and justice, carrying out justice. And I think if you look at John and think about the ways that he carries out justice and what his conceptions of it are, I think it's a very mature understanding of what justice might look like. And so John is this integration of both. And so I think that, to give a more concretized example that many people might be able to relate to, I think is really important. So to kind of wrap it up, how much is reading and writing necessary to make a good effect on my life, really your life? And my answer is going to be very vague, and it's actually going to be the same one for the sword, right? Because we don't want to forget about that. Because in today's day and age, we can think about the sword as kind of being negative. It's kind of we don't need that. We are civilized and above that, right? We don't need to have that immediate justice. And I think that again, with my examples, that we can find ways that we actually do use it every day, and we might just not know about it. So I believe that how much these will impact our lives depends. And it depends on your willingness to try and understand yourself and to educate yourself. And so, because we could talk about the pen being mightier than the sword, and all the scholars will raise their hands and say, hurrah, we won, we beat all the brutes. And that's not exactly the case. And the brutes will come, haha, you stupid nerds, and, bonk them with the sword of justice and righteousness and whatever. And so you have to work towards an integration. And I want you, because it's easy to get examples, right? There's 5-step guides to, I could have made this a 5-step guide to bringing the pen to be truly mightier than the sword or something like that, right? Something dumb and catchy and probably would have got me, I don't know, more viewers or something. But I really want you to explore these ideas for yourself and to see where the areas are that you are maybe in excess of one or the other, or maybe you're absent of both. Maybe you're just kind of cruising through life. And so I'd really invite you to try and figure out, right? I gave you some examples of journaling, of going to therapy, of reading great literature. I really want you to focus on that one, reading and writing about great literature and great ideas. And they're a lot simpler than the complicated words that are written in the books, right? These ideas are questions that we ask every day. And so really try to explore them and, start out small. Start out with, encountering one great idea a week or a month or a year. Start out small and try to just work on it, chew on it. And then with the sword, figure out where you are maybe in excess of using the sword, and maybe where some moderation can enter into your life, and where you can, be more tempered. But also maybe where you could be a little bit more immediate and focused on strength and power. And because we need to work towards this integration if we're going to understand both sides of the debate, of this debate that encapsulates humanity, right? This all because there's a reason that it has been so prevalent for so many years, for so many centuries, for so many millennia, right? Is that we need to understand whether or not where actually we are putting our emphasis in life. We need to cultivate wisdom and strength. if we're going to act effectively in the world. And to end, I just have a quote from Thucydides. That took me a second. The nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. And so I really want to invite you to think about how you might not be a fool or a coward. And so with that, I look forward to seeing you next episode. Thanks for following along, and I will see you next time.